I'm Carol Lewis. I'm 29 years old, and I teach high school art in Denver. I was the kind of kid who found comfort in colors and quiet corners. While my siblings raced each other up trees or argued about math homework, I'd be under the porch sketching shadows. I loved lines. I loved stillness. And most of all, I loved how my grandmother, Margaret, would pause behind me and whisper, "You see the world differently, Carol. Don't let anyone make you feel small for that." But the rest of my family, they never quite knew what to do with me. My parents are proud, pragmatic people, business owners, realists. To them, worth is measured in earnings, in promotions, in respectable careers that look good on holiday cards. My siblings followed that script perfectly, banking, medicine, law, predictable, celebrated. Then there's me, the art teacher, the one who lives in a small apartment, who brings home clay on her sleeves and emotion in her voice. The sweet one, they say. The sensitive one. Which is just their polite way of saying I don't belong. Every summer, my family gathers at our cabin in Oregon for a retreat. It's a tradition started by my grandparents meant to be about connection, joy, simplicity. But over the years, it morphed into something else curated, crowded, and quietly exclusive. Last week, I received the same message I'd gotten twice before. "It's a full house this year, Carol. Not enough space. Maybe next summer." I didn't respond. But 2 hours later, I opened Instagram and saw a post from my cousin, a group photo on the deck of the cabin. 45 people, family, spouses, friends, even acquaintances I didn't recognize, laughing, toasting, and not a single one of them seemed to notice I was missing. That's when it hit me this wasn't about space. It was about priorities, and I simply wasn't one of them. I drew a portrait of Grandma Margaret from memory, just charcoal on printer paper. But I'd shaded her glasses right, even the curls around her ears. At dinner, I passed it to Dad, proud. "It's for her birthday." He barely glanced at it. "Cute. But how about you write her a proper card next time?" Then he went back to reading emails on his phone. Mom smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Age 15. I stayed up for 2 nights working on a mixed media piece for the school art show. It was called Structure and Shadow, inspired by our family's vacation house, half real, half abstract. I invited everyone. Only Grandma showed up. Later, Dad asked why I didn't try out for the math Olympiad instead. "You're wasting your energy on stuff that doesn't lead anywhere." That night, I stopped asking for rides to galleries. Age 19. The letter came. University of Denver. BFA, Visual Storytelling. I was shaking with joy. I thought, maybe this time, they'll see me. Dad stared at the envelope. Mom said nothing. "You're really going through with this?" he asked. I nodded. "I have to." His face tightened. "Then don't expect help." And they didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. That was when I knew this wasn't about disappointment. This was exile. Have you ever felt like the outsider in your own family just because you chose a different path? Share your story in the comments. You never know who might find comfort in knowing they're not alone. The photo looked ordinary at first. Just another smiling group shot on a sunny deck, bare feet, matching drinks, lake glimmering in the background. But something about it pulled me in. I zoomed in, slowly, dragging 2 fingers across the screen. Behind the crowd, pinned to a wooden board, was a printed itinerary. My stomach dropped. Friday welcome dinner, 6:30 p.m., Saturday morning yoga, canoe groups, kids tie-dye station, Sunday farewell brunch, 10:00 a.m., and just below, bold text. Guest count 45 confirmed. 45. My eyes scanned the names, some familiar, some not at all. Friends of my siblings, work friends, even Lisa's college roommate, people I hadn't seen in years, some I had never met. My throat tightened. 45 people, and not a single one of them is me, I whispered. I put the phone down slowly. The kitchen around me quiet, except for the humming fridge. I wasn't forgotten. I was deliberately excluded. And for some reason, that hurt less than pretending it was an accident. I picked up my phone again, almost without thinking, and swiped left to the second photo. This one wasn't posed. It showed the cabin from a distance, wooden walls tucked between the trees, kids playing in front of it, someone carrying a tray of lemonade toward a second porch. But it wasn't our cabin. The layout was wrong. The trim was lighter. The porch railing had a different design. I froze. Then I saw the caption. So grateful we were able to rent the birchwood cabin next door for overflow. Perfect space for the extra crew. Next door, they'd rented a second cabin. I stared at the words until they blurred. The room felt like it had lost all its air, so there was more space. Enough for co-workers, old friends, plus ones. Just not enough for me. I whispered to no one. It's never been about space. Has it? I remembered Dad chuckling once, fork in hand. The more the merrier, unless Carol wants to talk about her feelings again. Everyone laughed, even me. I always did, because it's easier to laugh than to admit your presence is uncomfortable. My phone slipped slightly in my hand. I looked at the image again. 45 people, 2 full cabins. The silence in my apartment wrapped around me like a fog. I stood, walked to the window. Denver's rooftops stretched out, quiet and endless, and in that silence, something shifted. This time, I wasn't going to cry. I was going to build something. I sat back down on the couch, phone still in hand, the image of the rented cabin lingering like smoke in my mind. I needed to hear a voice that didn't make me question my worth. Without thinking, I pulled up Elena's name and hit call. It rang once, twice. Then her warm, always a little out-of-breath voice answered. Hey, you. What's going on? I didn't respond right away. My throat felt tight. Carol, she asked, more gently this time. They rented an extra cabin, I finally said, my voice barely a whisper. There was a pause. Then, not with pity, but with fierce clarity, she replied, Of course they did. Just like that. I felt seen. You're not overreacting, she added quickly. You've been so patient for so long, it's easy to forget how much it hurts. I closed my eyes. Her words found the places in me I'd kept silent. I didn't want it to be true. I murmured. Elena didn't rush me. She never did. I know, she said softly. But now that you see it, what do you want to do that night? After hanging up with Elena, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying her question. Now that you see it, what do you want to do? My sketchbook sat unopened on the coffee table, its cover like a dare. Then I remembered someone who used to ask me a very different question back in college, in the cluttered third-floor studio with splatters of paint on the walls. What are you afraid of painting? Cora Abigail. She was more than a professor. She was the first adult who treated my art like it mattered. I didn't hesitate. I opened my laptop and found her contact in the alumni directory. 10 minutes later, we were on a video call. She looked exactly the same, wild silver curls, oversized earrings, eyes that saw through you. Carol Lewis. She smiled. Your energy feels heavier than usual. I found out my family rented a whole extra cabin, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. 45 people, not one spot for me. She paused, then she said gently, still letting their map define your path. That line, it was hers. From junior year. I blinked. Suddenly, I was back in that messy art studio, crying over a ruined charcoal portrait. I'd thrown it across the room and muttered, Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not good enough. She had walked over, picked up the crumpled sketch, smoothed it out carefully like it was sacred. Then she said, This piece. It's the first time I've seen you show up in your work. I remember staring at her, confused. She continued, You were scared, frustrated, vulnerable, and you let it touch the paper. That's not weakness. That's truth. Back on the call, I swallowed hard. You were the first person who saw my work as real, I said softly. She nodded. Because you made it real. You felt your way through the canvas. The world doesn't always make room for that. So we create it. Then, as if sensing my hesitation, she leaned in again. So what space are you going to make now? Carol kong hoituk, kong ap luk, chila mot loi mo goin hen hang. Van gai kwan kach joben trong toi, tu gijo bung sang. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked around my apartment at the framed student drawings on my wall, at the watercolor set I hadn't touched in weeks, at the photo of Grandma Margaret by the window. Abigail must have sensed my hesitation. She leaned closer to the screen, eyes soft but steady. Carol, if they don't make space for you. She paused for just a breath, the kind that made words land deeper, then build a space so beautiful they wish they had. I froze. It wasn't angry or vengeful. It was simple. True. I nodded slowly, something unspoken shifting inside me. Abigail gave me that knowing smile again, the same one she'd given me years ago when I finally dared to paint something raw. Artists don't ask for permission, she said. We create anyway. I closed the call with a pulse in my chest I hadn't felt in a long time. Not rage, not grief, but something quieter, sharper. Conviction. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. There was a silence in the air, not heavy, but expectant, like the pause before a curtain lifts. I sat at the kitchen table, sketchbook open in front of me, sipping lukewarm coffee that I barely noticed. Words from the night before echoed in my head. Build a space so beautiful they wish they had. My pen moved almost on its own. First just shapes, then light, then a room wide, open, filled with color, paintings on brick walls, sculptures in corners, people walking slowly, taking it in, not critics, not clients, just humans seeing, feeling, a space for those who had never been given space. That was it. I closed the sketchbook and whispered to myself, it's time. Not time for revenge, not for proving anything, but to create something honest, joyful, free, a community art exhibit. One weekend, open doors, every medium welcome, everyone welcome. And just like that, the seed was planted. That afternoon, I drove across Denver toward the Rhino Art District, a neighborhood pulsing with murals, converted warehouses, and the smell of roasted coffee and fresh paint. I wasn't sure what I was looking for until I found it. Tucked between a record store and a small ceramic shop was an old brick gallery called The Frame. The name felt poetic, like it had been waiting for my story. Inside, sunlight filtered through massive warehouse windows, casting soft golden squares across the concrete floor, exposed beams, whitewashed walls, empty, but breathing with possibility. A young woman greeted me. Looking for a space, she asked. Friendly? Maybe. I smiled. Depends if it feels right. She handed me a clipboard with the rental sheet. We've hosted indie exhibits, student shows, even one silent dance performance. It's a flexible place. I wandered through the space slowly, fingertips grazing the rough brick, imagining my students' paintings hanging here, the smell of clay and acrylic in the air, conversations between strangers who'd never been seen before. Yes, this was it. I turned back to her, heart beating faster. How soon is it available later that night? I sat on my bedroom floor surrounded by sketchbooks, sticky notes, and an old wooden box that once belonged to Grandma Margaret. Inside was a faded letter, her handwriting still delicate. Still hers. Darling Carol, don't ever shrink yourself to fit into small minds. Make beauty loud, and when the world says you don't belong, create a space where others like you feel they do. My throat tightened. This exhibit, It wasn't about being seen by the people who had ignored me. It was about honoring those who had always felt unseen. I scribbled the title across the top of a blank page, not enough space, an art gathering. And then, underneath in bold letters, a place for the misfits, the dreamers, the not invited. A place where no one has to ask for permission to belong. That was the vision. I would invite former students whose styles were too strange, neighbors who painted in secret, teachers who never got to show their own work, everyone who ever felt like they had to quiet their passion just to be accepted. Here, they could be loud and beautiful and unapologetically themselves a few days later. I met Elena at a downtown cafe, her scarf splashed with color like an abstract painting. She was already waiting with her laptop open and a bright gleam in her eyes. "You really want to do this?" she asked, half excited, half testing me. "More than anything," I replied. She grinned. "Good, because I know exactly who we need." She pulled up a group chat labeled Studio Misfits, a collective of young, wildly creative artists she'd mentored at the local community center. There was June, who made sculptures from broken instruments, Kai, a street artist who painted poems on rooftops, and Leo, a non-binary digital illustrator who turned grief into breathtaking visual stories. They weren't famous, but they were bold, unfiltered, alive. Elena typed quickly. "My friend Carol is creating a community exhibit for anyone who's ever been told they didn't belong. We have a gallery. We need heart." Within minutes, responses flooded in. Finally. Something real. Tell us when. We're there. As I watched their names appear, one after another, I felt something unlock in me, like this wasn't just my story anymore. It was ours. That weekend, I spread the letter from Grandma Margaret across the dining table, anchoring each corner with a paint jar. Her words had already lived in my heart. Now, they would live on the walls. I titled the concept board "A Space to Belong." Each section of the gallery would echo a line from her letter. The entrance, "Make beauty loud." There, guests would walk through a tunnel of vibrant artwork, abstract, defiant, free. The center, "Don't ever shrink yourself." I imagined a circle of mirrors reflecting pieces from artists who had been told to tone it down, to be less, each mirror inscribed with the words, "Too much never," and the final section, "Create a space where others like you feel they do." Here, we'd set up an interactive wall where guests could draw or write their own affirmations. Elena glanced over my shoulder as I laid out the sketches. "It's more than a show," she whispered. "It's a reclamation." I nodded, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just building a gallery, I was building a home. A home for all the versions of me who had once felt small. The next step was the hardest pressing send. I stared at the invitation email on my screen. The subject line read, "You always saw me, now let me show you." I took a deep breath and hit send to 21 people. There was Mr. Landry, my old neighbor who used to let me sketch in his rose garden, my former student, Ava, who once told me I was the first adult to make her feel seen, Marcy, the school librarian who slipped poetry books into my mailbox every time she sensed I needed a nudge, and Elena, of course, already on board, but still the first one I wanted to officially invite. As the emails went out, I texted a few more. "I'm hosting something personal. I'd love if you came." One by one, the replies rolled in. "Of course. Wouldn't miss it. Thank you for thinking of me." Reading their responses, my chest ached, not with sadness this time, but something softer. For the first time in years, I wasn't hoping for validation. I was gathering the people who had already offered it quietly, consistently, without condition. The gallery deposit alone was 2 months of rent, printing costs, lighting rentals, refreshments. Each item chipped away at the summer school savings I'd quietly built over 3 years. I stared at my bank app one night, thumb hovering over the confirm transfer button. The numbers weren't pretty. "Are you sure about this?" I whispered to myself in the dark. No one else was around to answer. This money was meant for something practical: car repairs, maybe a better laptop for teaching, not a dream. But then I looked at the invitation card I'd printed as a test earlier that day. Bold lettering, delicate brush textures in the background, my grandmother's words etched in gold foil at the bottom. "Make your space. Don't wait for permission." I hit confirm. As the days ticked by, a new fear crept in. What if no one came? What if the gallery was full of carefully hung paintings, dimmed lights, and curated playlists? But empty seats I imagined standing there, smiling too brightly, pretending it didn't matter. Maybe they're right, I muttered one night, arranging name tags for potential guests. Maybe this is just me performing for an audience that doesn't exist. Elena called that night to check in. "You sound off," she said. "What's going on?" I paused. "What if I'm building something no one wants to enter?" She was quiet for a beat. Then Carol, "People want real, they want heart. You're not performing, you're inviting." I let out a small laugh, half a sigh. "You say that, but what if people think I'm just trying to prove a point? Like I'm throwing a tantrum because I wasn't invited to some family weekend?" Elena didn't hesitate. "Then let them think that," she said, her voice steady. "The people who matter will see the truth. They'll see the courage, not the tantrum." I was quiet, the weight of her words sinking in. "And what if I fail?" I whispered. "What if this all ends up being some misguided performance of strength?" There was a pause. Then, her voice, softer now. "Then at least you'll know you didn't shrink yourself to make space for others who never made space for you." That night, I sat on the floor of my studio, back against the wall, knees tucked to my chest. Around me were scraps of invitation paper, tangled extension cords, 2 unopened boxes of string lights, and the echo of a single, spiraling question: am I just pretending to be strong? Is this whole thing some performative bravery? I stared at the sketch of the mirror room I'd designed for the exhibit. Each mirror meant to reflect people who had been told they were too much, too loud, too weird, too emotional. And yet, here I was, doubting every inch of myself. I pressed my forehead to my knees and whispered, "Maybe I am being ridiculous." Then I noticed a folded piece of parchment wedged between the pages of my sketchbook, Grandma's handwriting. I had forgotten I tucked it there. "You won't always feel strong, Carol, but strength isn't loud. Sometimes it's just not giving up, even when your voice shakes." I closed my eyes. Not brave, but not quitting either. And maybe that was enough. 2 days before the show, I got the text. "Hey, Carol, I'm so sorry. Can't make it for the lighting setup. Emergency travel. Hope you understand. No punctuation. No backup plan. Just gone." I stared at the screen, pulse rising in my ears. The lights were half of the atmosphere without them. The exhibit would look flat, cold, unfinished. I sank into a folding chair, rubbing my temple. "Seriously," I muttered. "You bail now." I scrolled through my contact list, desperate. No one could do it on such short notice. And hiring someone new out of budget. That's when Elena walked in, holding 2 bubble teas. She stopped mid-step. What happened? I showed her the message. She blinked, then pulled out her phone. "I think I have someone. One of my old students, low-budget light wizard. Give me 10 minutes. I didn't say a word, just nodded. 10 minutes suddenly felt like the longest wait of my life. Exactly 9 minutes later. Elena's phone buzzed. She looked at me and nodded. "He's in. His name's Theo. He used to string festival lights with nothing but fishing wire and duct tape." 30 minutes after that, a dusty Honda Civic rolled up outside the gallery. Out stepped a lanky young man with glasses too big for his face and a backpack covered in pins that read, "Let art be loud." "You're Carol?" he asked. "I am." I tried to smile, but I knew the panic was still in my eyes. "Relax." He grinned. "I thrive on last-minute miracles." He unzipped the backpack and started pulling out coils of LED strips, adapters, even a small fog machine. Within hours, he and two of his friends, a lighting intern and a theater tech dropout, had transformed the cold gallery walls into something soft, warm, and alive. They used thrifted curtain fabric as backdrops, old mason jars with fairy lights for table displays, and hung paper mobiles from the rafters that spun gently with the breeze. I stood in the center of it all, blinking back tears. "How did you—" I whispered. Theo shrugged. "Easy. You gave us a reason. When the last strand of lights was secured and the final paper sculpture hung gently from the ceiling, the gallery fell into a golden hush. It was beautiful, not perfect, not polished, but full of warmth, intention, and something I hadn't felt in a long time presence. I stepped back to the center of the room. The light hit the mirrors just right, bouncing soft glows onto the painted walls, dancing shadows across the floor. My fingers grazed the edge of one canvas and I closed my eyes. In my mind, I saw her again, Grandma Margaret, sitting in her old armchair with her hands folded over a mug of chamomile tea. She looked at me with that same gentle defiance, the kind that said, "The world doesn't get to define you." "You do." I whispered aloud, barely audible. "I did it, Grandma." And in that moment, not even the silence felt empty. The gallery doors opened at exactly 6 p.m. At first, just a trickle 2 people, then 5, then 10, and then a wave. Former students clutching sketchbooks, neighbors carrying flowers from their gardens, colleagues from the art department, and artists from Theo's crew, still wearing flecks of paint on their jeans. Laughter floated through the air like incense. People pointed at pieces with wide eyes, lingered in front of mirrors, scribbled on the community wall with shaky hands and full hearts. Someone whispered, "This feels like therapy with color." I stood near the back, watching it unfold like a slow bloom. Elena came up beside me, eyes damp. "You did it," she said. "They showed up. For you." I was mid-conversation with a guest when I saw him. Tall, slightly slouched, wearing that same denim jacket he'd worn since high school. Mason. My breath caught. For a moment, I forgot the crowd, the music, even my own name. He wasn't alone. Beside him stood his wife, Lily, holding his hand with a look that said, "Let's just be here." I walked toward them slowly, not sure whether to smile or brace myself, but Mason spoke first. "It's amazing." "Carol." His voice cracked slightly. "I saw the photos online and, well, I had to see it in person." He stepped closer, his gaze landing on a painting in the far corner. A small canvas, simple strokes. A boy and a girl sitting under an oak tree, sharing a melted popsicle. Us. "You remember that summer?" he asked. I nodded, eyes stinging. "You gave me the red half." He smiled. "Yeah, because you hated the grape ones." By the next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Tag after tag, mentions from people I didn't know, photos of the mirror wall, close-ups of the melted popsicle painting, videos of guests writing on the community board, their hands trembling, their voices steady. Someone posted a reel with the caption, "For everyone who was ever told they didn't fit. This space is yours." It had over 12,000 views in 6 hours. Another wrote, "This isn't just an art show. It's a soft rebellion." I scrolled in disbelief, tears silently tracking down my cheeks. Then came a message from an unfamiliar account, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. "Your work is beautiful. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." And under that, a comment from my sister, a simple "I didn't know you could make people feel this scene." Around 4 sur après on the second day. Just as the sun dipped low and golden through the gallery windows, the door creaked open again, and there she was, Eleanor Collins, my grandmother's sister, hair white and pulled into a low bun, eyes sharp behind vintage glasses, and a navy coat she'd probably owned since the 80s. She paused just inside the doorway, scanning the room with calm curiosity. Then she smiled. "You know," she said as I approached, "your grandmother would have hated the lighting in here. A beat, but she would have cried seeing all this." I laughed sharp and sudden, then choked on it. She walked over to the melted popsicle painting, her hand grazing the edge of the frame. "Margaret always said," she murmured, "Carol doesn't just paint with color, she paints with memory." I didn't know what to say. I just hugged her. She leaned close and whispered, "Your grandma would have been damn proud." And by the way, I left the family retreat early to be here. That night, after the gallery closed, I sat cross-legged on the floor between easels and empty paper cups. My phone buzzed again. First, a message from my older brother. "Did you really host this while we were all at the retreat?" No emoji, no punctuation, just confusion disguised as accusation. Then my sister. Was this meant as some kind of statement? I didn't reply. Not yet. Then, finally, one from Mom. Short, tentative. "Can you tell me more about what this exhibit meant to you?" I stared at the screen. So she'd seen it, or at least heard of it. Enough to ask, enough to wonder, and that, somehow, stung more than silence. I didn't type anything. I didn't even open the messages. Instead, I looked around at the quiet gallery, now dimmed and silent chairs stacked, paper cups tossed, string lights humming their last warmth. I walked back toward the center of the room, where the melted popsicle painting still hung. I remembered the brushstrokes, how my hand trembled painting it. Not because I wasn't sure of the image, but because I was afraid of how much truth it held. I thought about those texts, the tone, the hesitation. They didn't feel like attacks. They felt uncertain, curious, maybe even a little shaken. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to justify myself, to explain, to soften the edges. Instead, I whispered to the painting they saw it. They felt it. That's enough for now. And I turned off the last light. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had just finished leading my 4th period class in a charcoal portrait session. The kids were still buzzing, showing each other smudged fingers and lopsided sketches. Then I saw them through the glass of the front office. Mom and Dad, standing stiff, out of place, like they weren't sure whether they were allowed to be here. I stepped into the hallway. The air between us felt thick. Dad looked at the rows of student drawings pinned on the walls. Mom held her purse like a shield. "We'd like to talk," she said quietly. "Somewhere private." I led them to the empty art supply room. Smelled like acrylic and dust. They sat, I stood, and then, for the first time in years, I spoke without shrinking. "You didn't forget me," I said. "You chose not to include me, because I didn't fit." Dad opened his mouth, closed it. Mom's lip trembled. Dad finally spoke. "We didn't mean to hurt you." His voice was rough, like it hadn't been used for softness in a while. "It's just, we thought you wouldn't be comfortable with everyone, with how we do things. I didn't flinch. You thought I wouldn't fit. So instead of adjusting the space, you erased me from it." Silence. Then, soft knocking. The door creaked open and one of my students peeked in, holding a canvas with wet blue swirls. "Miss Lewis, is this too much water?" I smiled, walked over, adjusted his brushstroke, and sent him off. When I turned back, my parents were staring, not with judgment, not confusion, just surprise. Dad looked around the room, at the shelves of used sketchbooks, the mobiles made of wire and dreams. "You built something here," he said. Mom nodded slowly. "And it matters." Mom folded her hands in her lap. "We thought we were protecting you." She didn't meet my eyes, from disappointment, from feeling like you didn't belong. I exhaled, steady. "I already felt that way." "You just confirmed it." Silence again. Then Dad shifted in his seat. "Next year's retreat," he said, "there will be space for you. Not because we feel guilty, but because we want you there." I looked at him, long and quiet. "Thanks," I said. "But I'm not sure I need that space anymore." Mom blinked, startled, then nodded slowly. "Then maybe," she said gently, "we can come to your space next time, if you'd have us." I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. As we walked back down the hallway, past finger-painted posters and chipped lockers, I stopped by the bulletin board near my classroom. A flyer was pinned there. "Not enough space. Annual showcase coming this spring." I turned to them. "There's going to be another one," I said, bigger, louder, even more unapologetically. "Me?" Mom looked at the flyer. Her voice was careful, almost reverent. "Can we come?" I nodded. "As guests. Not as critics, not as organizers, just people who want to understand." Dad gave a small smile. "We'll be there, if the invitation still stands." I met their eyes. "It will. But this time, I'm not shrinking to make room. You'll have to meet me where I already stand." Weeks later, I sat alone at my desk, surrounded by dried brushes and scraps of canvas. I pulled out an old letter from a keepsake box yellowed edges, handwriting I knew by heart, my grandmother's last note to me. "You won't need to wait for permission to shine," it read. "When the door doesn't open for you, build a house without one." I smiled through tears. The success of Not Enough Space had been more than a response. It had become a movement. We were already planning the next showcase this time with submissions from all over the state. Young artists, old souls, people who were told they were too weird, too quiet, too loud, too much. This space was for them, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to earn a seat. I was the one building the table. If you've ever felt like there wasn't enough space for you in your family, your work, or the world, I hope this story reminded you that sometimes the space we need is the one we create. Drop a 1 in the comments if this story resonated with you. Drop a 2 if you've ever built your own table when none was offered. And if you have a story about finding your voice, I'd love to read it. You never know who might need it today.